Valaverse's Action Force Wave 1 has been in the studio for a few weeks now, and I've taken some time to really reflect, get familiar with the figures, get my thoughts together, and now I'm ready to say something. Over the past few weeks, I'm sure you've seen YouTube channels review the first wave of Valaverse's Action Force. They've talked about the articulation, they've talked about the paintwork, they've talked about the design, the characters. They've even gone into, in some cases, the mythology behind Action Force, the story behind these characters, the comic books, which I even did a video on a few months ago. I don't want to retread that ground. The high level is that Action Force, as reimagined by Valaverse, is a story of conflict in a broken America between a guy called Karak, an insurgent army called the Swarm, and then the people fighting for freedom, including Condor, who is the British officer who stayed behind when the rest of the British forces were recalled to England, and he said, no, I'm going to stay here and help, and of course, Sergeant Slaughter, and a number of other characters that we'll be seeing in Wave 2. But there's something else going on here with Action Force, beyond the figures themselves, beyond the mythology, that's really important for toy collectors to understand. In the past 25 years, we've watched every single toy company that competed with Mattel and Hasbro get bought out. We've watched every single one get acquired. And in the midst of all that carnage, we've seen other companies pop up, but they really are only popping up to take advantage of the adult action figure collecting market. And when I say take advantage, I don't mean anything insidious. I simply mean that that's their focus. They're focused on premium-priced adult collectible figures. Now, I will be the first to say that yes, Action Force is an online-only venture right now, and the prices arguably are for adults only. However, with that price point narrowing every quarter as Hasbro continues to raise prices on its own toys, and with the evidence that there are a lot of kids who seem to like the Action Force action figure brand, seeing it come in through their dads, Valaverse's Action Force seems to be positioning itself as having higher aspirations than just being another Super 7 or NECA. We're dealing with a company that is on its initial wave of products, and yet its initial wave of products could easily be the 5th or 6th year of development for any other toy company just getting started. I don't know if you've taken that into account. And we desperately need toy companies right now that have the potential to take on Hasbro and Mattel in the future. And do it in a way where they're trying to not only build a universe, but also build a product line that will appeal to all age groups. Right now, the 6-inch thing is, yes, it's the flavor du jour of toy collecting for action figures. It's the unbeatable standard right now. All the adults have forced 6-inch into our minds, and that's why Action Force started that way, which wasn't necessarily a bad move. But what Action Force has done is it's decided to come out immediately with the generic troop builder figures, the weapons packs, the things that we all remember from toy lines back when we were kids in the 80s and 90s. That is something that none of these other companies, whether they be Hasbro, Mattel, or NECA Super 7, are really pursuing. There are some very niche companies doing these things in different scales, like Marauder Task Force. But ultimately, Valaverse is the first one to step in and say, we're going to jump right into the hottest scale, which is 6-inch. We're going to put our faith in a military-based toy line, which has not been the case in the toy world for a long time. Hasbro dipped its toe in the water with G.I. Joe Classifieds, and now they're trying to play catch-up with the brand at this point. But even they're getting fractured in their own way with the O-Ring venture and the 25th anniversary modern 3 3/4-inch venture. They've sold off part of the rights to Super 7 so they can do 5 POA and 7-inch G.I. Joes. So that whole brand is once again splintered across all these different companies and formats, none of which are taking into account that no one G.I. Joe enthusiast can afford all of that material. What Valaverse has done is they've said, we're going to focus on the 6-inch as our core offering, and everything that we're going to make is going to be compatible with that 6-inch scale. So that affords them the ability to make the weapons packs and explore other ideas down the road, because this is their core character line. It's odd to me how modern toy companies, instead of taking the resources they have and trying to expand around the scale they've chosen for that line, instead say, no, instead of making a lot of interesting accessories and add-ons for these lines, I'm instead going to make shampoo bottle scale action figures, and then I'm going to make small little action figures in little boxes with little gimmicks, and then I'm going to make these 6-inch figures right in the middle, and the whole thing is just splintered. Action Force isn't doing that. Yeah, right now, they're online. Right now, they are a few bucks more than your average 6-inch Hasbro Legends. But like I said, those price points, they're narrowing very fast. If this was 10 years ago, yeah, you could say, well, the Hasbro 6-inch offerings give me more bang for my buck because they're $14.99. Well, now they're $24, $26.99 for a standard. And what you're getting is what you got pretty much 10 years ago. Whereas Valaverse with Action Force, they've really reached for the stars with what they wanted to accomplish with these action figures. They said, no, we're going to use state-of-the-art joints. We're going to use the latest findings with our articulation. We're going to use the latest findings with sculpting and paint apps and really deliver the goods on face sculpting. We're going to do all of that from wave 1 going forward. So you're not going to have this disparity when you get to wave 3 or 4. From everything I understand, Bobby is going to be improving everything that he's found and learned with Wave 1. So there are still areas where these figures are going to evolve, but right out of the gate, they are head and shoulders above what Hasbro is doing in the 6-inch space. There are very few action figure companies right now in the 6-inch scale that can claim to achieve what Action Force has achieved in its initial public offering. I can't stress that enough. The paintwork on these figures is impeccable. The sculpting of each face is wholly unique, so every character looks different from the previous one. You've got weapons, interchangeable hands. Every figure comes with working holsters, working knife sheaths. By every measure, this is an impressive lineup of figures, even if it was wave 5 of a company's line. But this is wave 1, and it's only going to get better from here. Unlike the NECAs and unlike the Super 7s that are kind of coasting, and let's be honest, they're coasting. Oh, sure, they have IPs that everybody likes. Like, they have all these legacy IPs, but they are coasting. They're not really trying to improve. Valaverse, on the other hand, is hungry. And I mean that in the best way possible. Valaverse wants to bring something different. And not just different in terms of the toy itself with all the joints and all the paint and all that kind of stuff. They're bringing us something original in terms of a mythology, in terms of an intellectual property. We keep talking all the time about how we wish that the entertainment industry would make something original, would make something different, would make something new. We're tired of the reboots, the reimaginings. We've just seen Lucasfilm ditch the one intellectual property right they had to an original novel. They just squandered it and said, nah, we're just going to keep focusing on our, legacy IPs and all of our in-house stuff. And what happened? Paramount goes and does a bidding war with these other studios and grabs this best-selling novel because everyone's looking inward. Everyone's just kind of looking at their belt buckle. Nobody is actually trying or risking anything to break this cycle. And the only thing that breaks up a monopoly historically when a few large companies have a stranglehold on an industry is innovation and new ideas coming from a brand new company. We're seeing it right now with Action Force. I can hear some of you now saying, well, Action Force isn't an original IP. It is legally now, because Valaverse doesn't have the rights to any of the legacy characters from Action Force. Action Force is just a name. It's 2 words, Action Force. And yeah, put together they can be trademarked, but Hasbro let that trademark lapse. Bobby and Valaverse picked it up, but they didn't have the rights legally to recreate the entire universe, and they didn't really want to. Why? Because Bobby is an American toy maker. And as much as some people want to believe that Action Force has been popular around the world, it was, except here in America, where we had G.I. Joe. So Bobby and Valaverse are saying, we're going to make Action Force something here in the United States for the first time. something memorable, something people can really get excited about and get behind. And hopefully the international toy collecting community will recognize and acknowledge the risk that Bobby has taken with trademarking Action Force under a brand new mythology. Because Baron Ironblood and all those guys were very popular in the 80s in other countries. They weren't popular here in America, and Hasbro has let all of that die for the most part. But Valaverse sees this as an opportunity. Bobby never intended to resurrect the mythology of the original Action Force and reboot it. He just really liked the name and liked the legacy of what was behind the name, a military toy line. And Valaverse has decided to go in a brand new direction with Action Force as the trademarked name of this line. In terms of its flavor, it is very much in the lineage of the original Action Force. It is a military action figure-based toy line. But really, at the end of the day, legally, it is completely original and new. And it is especially new to Americans and the American toy collector market. So anybody saying that this is just some kind of rehash or yet another reboot is really missing the boat on what Valaverse has done. And one last point I want to make about originality. I have seen some people saying, well, yeah, it's legally distinct, but Action Force is still just a reskin of G.I. Joe, because they say there's the good guys and then there's the swarm, which they argue is like Cobra. Show me a mythology, especially in the 70s and 80s of pop culture, especially in the 80s with the cartoons and the 90s. Show me a mythology that didn't have the good guys and the bad guys. Show me one. Show me one that didn't have the Rebellion and the Empire, the Autobots and the Decepticons, the Eternians and Skeletor's Horde, or Hordak's Horde and Skeletor's Goons, whatever they called Skeletor's guys. The Snake Mountaineers, I don't know. Mythologies are archetypes. You can't get around that. It's the basis of all of our storytelling. King Arthur and Mordred. I mean, it goes back so far. So to say that the Swarm versus Condor, and to say that's G.I. Joe, that's crazy. Because then we might as well apply that to everything we grew up with. And I do mean everything. I mean, you could say, yeah, it's Voltron and the Drools, or it's Robotech versus the Zentradi, or it's the Federation versus the Klingons. I mean, we could keep going. If you want to go down this rabbit hole, we'll keep going. I can't remember all of them. It's Starcom versus the Shadow guys, whatever they are. It's Black Star versus the Overlord. These are mythological constants. They are not specific to G.I. Joe. So anybody that doesn't want to recognize that for the sake of just trying to do some kind of critical layup on Action Force, that's a very weak argument. And that's what I like the most about the Action Force effort, is the originality, is the fact that it is something new, and it is especially something new to this country and this toy market. These are completely new, original characters in a completely original and unique set of circumstances that we have not read about before. I like the fact that every time I see a character being announced, I've never seen that character before. I like the fact that it's not just the 50th, 60th, 100th incarnation of Optimus Prime. I like the fact that it's not the 400th re-release of Snake Eyes. I like that. It's what this toy industry needs. I think one of the best things to have happened in the toy industry prior to Valaverse was Fortnite getting a hold in the toy industry. I'm never going to play the game. I own one of the Fortnite toys, which is the little car, but I was so glad to see something new on pegs that were action figures. I really was. What I'm really trying to impress upon you about Valaverse's Action Force is that it has all of the elements in place to potentially compete with Hasbro and Mattel in the future, to really shake things up in the toy collector world. You know, Super 7, NECA, I know a lot of people are still very much about their brands that they loved when they were 7. There's nothing wrong with that, but those companies are just kind of riding these mechanical bulls of old IPs. Back to the Future and Ninja Turtles and, you know, Silverhawks and, hey, we're doing 5 POA G.I. Joes that nobody asked for. But in all the years that Super 7 and NECA have been around, what have they not achieved? They haven't been able to unseat Mattel and Hasbro. They really haven't been able to give them a run for their money. Playmates is the same way. It just keeps leaning on its Ninja Turtles IP license, and that's about it. It's gonna take something original. You know, Mego was the top dog in the 70s for a long time, and it was just over-licensing everything. It was licensing all the stupidest stuff it could think of, whether it was the Love Boat or you name it. I mean, individual movie stars and artists. It was just licensing everything it could. I think they even had a Christy McNichol doll at one point or something. But then it got upset and unseated by a little company called Kenner with an action figure line called Star Wars. Now, again, Kenner didn't own Star Wars, but Kenner took the risk on it, and Star Wars was a new and original thing. And then every single toy company, of which there were many, thank God, out there in the 80s, said, you know what? We've all got to get in on this 3 3/4 inch action figure game. What do we have? What can we compete with? What can we do? And so they jumped out there with a refresh of G.I. Joe, which became supremely popular. And Gabriel got out there with, you know, licensing Legend of the Lone Ranger and the Zorro Filmation cartoon, which, you know, were met with middling success. But nonetheless, there was suddenly variety out there. Remco's Crystar and all of these different companies were trying to get out there and say, we've got something too. We're going to get out there with something. And so we saw all of these original ideas come to fruition and then hit the toy shelves. And then suddenly Hasbro really had to up its game, and Mattel really had to up its game. And sure, at that time, they were competing in the marketplace with original ideas, Masters of the Universe and G.I. Joe and Transformers and all of these things. But every year in the toy catalogs, they had to come out with something bigger and better than the other guy. You've got Snake Mountain? Well, watch this. I've got an aircraft carrier. And it was the game of one-upsmanship. That's what drives industries to success. And that's what gets customers interested in those industries. And right now, the action figure market has stagnated. So yes, Valaverse's Action Force may be in name a callback to another Action Force, but legally it can never be the other Action Force. It is its own thing, lock, stock, and barrel, an original idea that just happens to have a name from way back. But this is the first all-original, fully realized action figure line to come out in a long time from a company that wasn't Hasbro and wasn't Mattel. Even Jazzware's Fortnite is like Kenner's Star Wars, where it's coming from a pre-existing IP that they licensed. But this is like how they did it in the 80s. This is a toy company generating an IP from within and saying, okay, we're starting from a blank page. What can we do? Not just how can we deliver groundbreaking action figures? How can we bring customers the very best? How can we appeal to both kids and adult collectors at the same time? How can we reinvigorate a dead toy genre, the military toy genre, make it even better with the working holsters, the removable gun magazines, the actual removable, swappable hands where you can hold a rifle with one hand supporting the foregrip. Some of this stuff has never been done before, at least not to the extent that Action Force is doing it. Not in this scale. And then on top of that, say, how can we also deliver a new original story in a comic book line and then exploring other mediums for that as well? And then continue to announce new waves, just like we were used to back in the 80s. And it's not just random stuff being thrown at us saying, oh yeah, 3 months from now, we're going to come out with like these 5 figures. No, these figures are all tied to a story. And it's not a story that can make anybody mad because it's not the 50th retelling of G.I. Joe or the 400th reimagining of Masters of the Universe. This is a breath of fresh air, badly needed fresh air. I mean, you get nose death when you're in a house that just smells like cat pee until you step outside. That's what this felt like when these action figures showed up. I really hope that Valaverse will continue to innovate. I hope to see after Wave 2 and 3 vehicles and all kinds of things for this line. And I hope to see this line become popular enough that it goes beyond fan channels and it might get a foothold at retail somewhere. I would love to see that. So whether you love them or hate them, they're original, they're here, they're the best 6-inch figures on the market right now, and they have the potential to run a marathon.